Welcome to Syntax. Today we got a potluck episode for you two. This is you bring the questions, we bring the answers. Some really good questions today around should you be adding time to your loading spinners so they don't flick off so quickly? Quoting work for existing websites. So you're going to do some work on an existing website, and how do you know what lies on the back end? Is it going to be awful? Is it going to take you a long time? How do you figure that out? Partitioned cookies is kind of a new thing to how cookies work. We're going to dive into that. Should you use Hono with SvelteKit or Remix or something like that, or is that not really a use case? And some questions around the interviewing process as well. Let's get on into it.
Before we do that, let's go ahead and take a quick second to check out Sentry. Sentry.io is the perfect place to track and solve all of your bugs. Man, I ran a big migration, a big whole migration on the code base recently, and I pushed to production because nobody gave me a code review. Wes, I'm just going to say that nobody gave me a code review. I was very sad. I requested several code reviews, and everybody said, I'm too busy.
I gave it a look over.
No, I know.
But I wasn't. You're the Svelte master, so
yeah. It also touched like 100 some files. It touched the whole app.
Yeah.
So I'm being cheeky here. But either way, we ran a whole big migration, and there is one bug that keeps coming up from that migration. Something about a proxy object could not be cloned. And let me tell you, I'm going to fix that bug today because it was really just the assurance of knowing that I could, our test pass, the code builds, I manually tested it, but I know that if I push it to production and there's something wrong, we're going to see it in Sentry, and then I'll be able to make sure that gets fixed. So this little proxy object could not be cloned bug will not be sticking around for long because we've had 29 instances of it in the past 24 hours, which isn't a ton. That's not a ton. So it's clearly not hitting that many people, but something is happening there, and I'm going to find out what. So thank you, Sentry. Sentry.io/syntax sign up and get 2 months for free using the coupon code TASTYTREAT. All right, let's get into it.
All right, we got lots of really good questions for you today. Again, if you got a question, please send it to us. Go to syntax.fm, and in the URL bar, there's something that says potluck. Click on that, send us your question or thought, or really send us anything. And we'll answer it on an upcoming episode. The first one we have here is from Justin P. Scott mentioned that sending his Tory app from Hack Week to the rest of the team was tricky and required some Apple foo for signing and certifying the app. I'm curious what is required. Thanks, everything on the Syntax team. Yeah, this is an interesting question because when you build a desktop application, or even like when I want to run apps on my Samsung TV that are not in the store, you have to do a whole certificate signing process. So what is that like, Scott?
Yeah. So for the process in Tory, if you're distributing on Apple and you want the app to open without a message that says this app is damaged, which is when I first sent it to the team, I didn't realize that it would come with that message. I thought it might just be like, this is an unapproved developer, click OK, that message. But it was like, this application is damaged. So I needed an Apple developer's account, which I already had. It's shaky because it's under my Level Up Tutorials LLC and not under Syntax, but we're not distributing it to anybody, so it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I just needed to sign it. And the process involved creating several certificates. Now, it was interesting because I'm trying to pop open the docs right here, because what you first had to do was create a signing certificate on their website. You had to download the certificate, you had to put it in your profiles, you had to configure Tory, you had to sign it locally, you had to have basically everything in your config, you had to run some commands, you had to open some things in Xcode. There's
a lot of work.
There's a couple of pages on Tory's docs that explain exactly the process, and if I'm being entirely honest, if I had to do it a second time here, I would have to look at the docs again, because it's just like step. All right, now that you're ready to go, you've done everything, your certificate is loaded up into Xcode. When you build the application, if you have all of the proper information set, it should then be signed. Now, I don't even know the process of getting it into the App Store. There's docs on that as well in the Tory documentation, which is actually really good for this stuff. But really, when you're done and you build the thing, you end up just getting a DMG, which is a disk image, and I can pass that disk image around, load it up, and that's it. So what is required? Basically, you need an Apple developer's account. You need to create that signing certificate, and then just follow the directions in their docs. Because it's different than pushing go and having a website deploy, right?
Yeah, and we should say the benefit of having an application signed is that not anyone can just come around and replace that application. Like you leave your computer open and you swap it out with a nefarious version.
Yep.
The operating system is it's similar with the HTTPS certificates or whatever the certificates are called, where it's going to throw a fit if somebody nefarious tries to replace or tamper with that, because that's another thing as well. Is like it could be the application, but if you then change it, that's part of the reason why it's hard to change or add CSS to VS Code as well, because you're literally tampering with the runtime of the application.
Yeah, which is funny because when I use the APC, I don't even know if that works anymore, but when I was using APC for VS Code had no problem with you modifying those files. I mean, whatever they did made it so VS Code had no problems with. But the same process on Cursor immediately says, Cursor's corrupt, can't do anything, and all it's doing is modifying some CSS files. And the app still loads, it still works, but like a little toast message pops up and it's like, there's something wrong with your install.
Yeah, it looks like the APC is now broken within a latest update to VS Code.
Yeah. I think that was just due to a file name changing, and then the developer just hasn't updated it yet.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Next question from CDog. I enjoyed your content on Hono and SvelteKit, but is there any point in using them together? This is a great question because, we talk a lot about, if you want a backend stack framework, then you got to use Hono. But if you want to build an entire app, both front end and back end, then maybe reach for SvelteKit or Next.js or Remix or TanStack Start or any of these like full stack frameworks, right? And the answer to that is no. You probably don't need Hono, or Nitro is another one in the space as well, if you are using a full stack framework. And in fact, TanStack Start is built on Vinci, which Vinci is Vite and Nitro together. Essentially, if you want to build your own stack or you have some existing legacy code base that you want to move over, maybe you'll reach for Hono and Svelte. Or if you want to make your own custom framework, then you can do that. But if you are starting fresh, no, you can go straight in and just grab SvelteKit, Next.js, Remix, TanStack Start, any of those.
Yeah. What's interesting about this question, Wes, is that there was a post on Reddit a while ago, and I'm trying to find it, where people were like asking about this stack, and they were saying, I'm using SvelteKit and Hono, and I'm like, so many people in the comments were saying, that's awesome, I do the same thing. And I'm just thinking, why? I don't get it.
Oh.
And sure, I guess if you're moving over, or if you want a completely separate process to control your backend, right? But man, it's so easy to do the other way. Yeah, I get maybe having a separate backend, but at the same time, man, you can host a full API, just an API via SvelteKit. You can have endpoints. It feels flexible enough to me that unless I really had an application that I was needing to scale in a different way, I would pretty much never reach for having a separate backend.
Yeah, I think there's probably still use cases, especially if somebody has an existing backend, because if you were like trying to pitch to your team, you're like, all right, we have an Android app, we have a React Native app, and we have a website. What are we going to build our API on? I don't know that people would say SvelteKit, because like you kind of have to use the Svelte part of that to make that really worth it. It would be really odd to do that. And if that's the case, you can use Hono and SvelteKit together, where Hono would be, you build your entire API, right? You put your Drizzle schemas in there, you do all of your middleware, you do all of your caching and access control, everything would happen inside of there. And then your Svelte server side would be a very thin layer that would simply just import the Hono API, and you can use that to hit your API endpoints, get your data and whatnot.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I was seeing people asking if they could literally embed Hono into SvelteKit. Like, can I have Hono routes inside of my SvelteKit server side? Which to me makes no sense whatsoever. I can understand especially separating your UI from your API in terms of the code base. That's no problem to me. But I've never needed a replacement for SvelteKit's own endpoints within SvelteKit.
Like the router is so core to these things that if you all of a sudden had two routers, that might be a little bit funky. I'm sure you could do it, but I don't think that would be very fun.
I don't get it. Yeah. Any point in using them together? Yeah, I think we kind of hit all of the different reasons why you may or may not want to use them together. If I was having to have a separate API server, I probably would pick Hono today, or a separate backend server or whatever, just because it's the one I like the most out of all of the available options. All right, next question from Jack Broomer. Hello. In many of your episodes, you talk highly of Vite in both ease of use and raw performance. However, I don't think I've heard you guys mention Rspack Rsbuild. I personally have found it much easier to migrate from CRA with some custom Webpack extensions to Rspack. I think I spent more than a week trying to make Vite compile esoteric module oddities versus less than an hour for Rspack. While we're not using Rspack for production builds just yet, it has sped up our local development builds from 1 to 2 minutes to less than 5 seconds. Yeah. Local development builds, 1 to 2 minutes. Woof. That's all I got to say there. Thanks for reading and love the show. Yeah, totally. I think for me, one of the reasons why you won't hear me mentioning Rspack very much is specifically because I did not use Webpack. I'm one of the few lucky developers who got to skip Webpack entirely. I did not ever work on anything with Webpack. I did Rollup, I did ISO build, I did Vite, never did Webpack. So that is the main reason why you don't hear me personally talking about it. But Rspack is a very cool project. And definitely I think one of the things that Webpack users have been missing out on more recently is seriously just the speed of this modern tooling, whether that is via Esbuild, Vite, or now Rspack, or any of these new faster tools that have been just really, really cruising on it. One that I'm super interested in, and the Vite team is all about, is Rolldown. And Rolldown is a fast Rust bundler for JavaScript and TypeScript with a Rollup compatible API. Now, this is like kind of, I think, the future of Rollup for them, because Rollup, by the way, you know Rich Harris created Rollup, right?
I actually did not know that until I was writing the notes for this question. I was like, oh, Rich Harris wrote Rollup?
I had used Rollup before in the past, and I remember seeing that. And Rollup, awesome build tool in the past, but definitely more of we use Esbuild for development builds or whatever. So either way.
Let's explain that. This thing about Webpack is there's so many people that have huge applications on Webpack, and there is no hope for them to move over to Vite, either because they've built a whole bunch of custom loaders that are specific to their company, or it's such a tangled mess that it's not worth even moving over. And there's tons of people, they built their whole app on Create React App, and then at some point you eject out of Create React App, and then you have your own Webpack build, and then there's maybe you have some Babel stuff built in there, and it's just like, it's not worth moving over, So Rspack is a Rust-based implementation of Webpack, and it's such a good solution to, if you have a slow Webpack, is try Rspack, because it supports most of the Webpack API. There's also TurboPack from the folks at Vercel. They actually hired the guy who built Webpack to build TurboPack, and it's pretty close. I tried moving a couple of Next.js sites over to TurboPack, and I still hit a couple issues around web workers and MDX plugins don't work yet and whatnot. So I had to switch back, which is kind of annoying. But roll down is awesome. So Vite uses Rsbuild in like development to just transform a JSX and things like that. And then when you want to build, they use roll down. So they have two different bundling tools.
They use roll up. Yeah.
Roll up. Yes. But the idea with roll down is that it will replace both Rsbuild for dev and roll up for production, which that's kind of wild that Vite uses two different tools. And I don't think I've ever hit a inconsistency between the two. And like you think like, oh, running a different tool in dev than prod, that seems risky.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with it personally. I think they've really figured out whatever that is. But by the way, roll down is built using OXC, which is something we've talked about quite a bit, which is the JavaScript oxidation compiler. I don't know what oxidation means here, but basically it's a Rust-based compiler for JavaScript that we've talked about quite a bit on this show. But that's what roll down is using to do its stuff, to do its compilation at least.
Yeah, and that's we're actually having Evan Yu on the show in a little bit, and he basically just started a company to fund all of this stuff, right? Because there's Vite, VTest, roll down, and OXC. OXC is behind, under the hood for roll down. So he's doing a lot of stuff for the industry. That's my one caveat of Next.js right now is that like it seems like Next.js is the only one sticking on Webpack and everybody else is on Vite. And Vite has such a obviously TurboPack has a good feature as well, but it seems a bit odd where things have to be a little bit different in the Webpack world.
Yeah, I know. Vite has such a great big community and a ton of stuff behind it. It feels like that's such a huge selling point. The Vite community is really big and strong. You mentioned TurboPack, not really related other than by where it comes from in the name, but Turbo Repo is something I've really been diving into a lot lately, Wes. I don't know. At first, I was not sold on needing a thing like Turbo Repo, but man, so for people who don't know, Turbo Repo is it's a way to kind of manage your dependencies, to manage your build in a way that it can cache your build, it can make your monorepo stuff easier, it can run a whole bunch of commands at once. Man, I added Turbo Repo to my starter, my drop-in starter.
Yeah.
And it has made developing that thing so much easier with being able to work in my workspace so much better. So shout out to Turbo Repo. It's one of those tools that I kind of was like, I don't need this. And then now that I tried, I'm like, what's that meme where the bird is like angry and then it eats the cracker and then it's like,
it's like, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I run Turbo Repo on my courses platform. We had Jared on. Actually, he friggin' did a call with me and helped me set it up. What a good guy.
Nice, man.
And basically you can I have like a monorepo and I have like 3 different like apps and those all have dev commands. So you can say turbo run dev and it will run the corresponding dev commands for all of them. And then when you build the thing, it's smart enough to know which parts need to be rebuilt, and then it will also cache them in the node modules directory. So when I go to deploy the thing, because I use render, but this is the same on many CIs, they will cache the node modules directory so that you don't have to npm install every single time. And what they do is they stick the cache of your build in the node modules directory so that the next time you run a build, it goes, hey, I left this here last time, and it pulls it back out. And then the further benefit, and this is like how they make money, both Turbo Repo and Evan Yu's new Void Zero, I bet is going to do this, is they do like remote caching, meaning that like if you run a dev command on your computer, and some of these apps take, like this guy just said, takes 5 minutes to run a local dev command just to start the whole thing up. because there's a lot that needs to happen. If you do that on your computer, now you can then share that cache with other people, both in dev as well as production. So you could have really speed it up. There is one caveat that I've hit though, is that every time I run Turbo repo, it sticks the cache in my node modules, but then my node modules continues to grow. And part of the CI is that it restores the node modules. So at a certain point, it's much slower because the node modules restoration is so large. So every now and then I have to blow the node modules cache away because it's faster to npm install and do a fresh build versus use the cache, which is kind of hilarious.
Yeah, for people who don't have this, I highly recommend just dropping a script into your shortcuts or your aliases or anything that is just nuke all of the node modules from a given directory. I use that somewhat frequently. Or even better, I have a clean command in my package.json that does all that for me.
Next question from It Depends. How do you quote potential clients on the cost of updating their website if you don't have access or inside knowledge that they have already built? Considering factors such as the previous agencies worked on the site and their reluctancy to help another competing business is, that's true. Potential clients unable to give or grant access to the code or CMS that their website uses. Yes, this is a thing I hit all the time. Oh, cool. Can you give me access so I can just kind of poke around? Oh, I don't know who has the password to that. It's terrifying that so many businesses don't have control over their own web presence. It goes on to say, typically clients do not have the faintest idea of the tech that went into their website or how it was built. And when you come in as a freelancer new agency, you have no idea how much it costs to quote. Where do we even begin on this type of thing? Yeah, it depends, right? The answer to this is you need to do your research into it. And if you can't access it, you're going to need to be able to access it eventually. And I get that they're probably trying to just kind of suss it out, be like, hey, how much would it be cost to add a page to our website? I think you can give them a bit of a ballpark if you know just by viewing source. You can usually figure out viewing source, looking at the headers of the request. You can usually figure out what the back end is built in, and you can kind of get a decent idea for what it is. But quite honestly, I would say, hey, it's going to be this crazy wide. If it's what I think it is, here's my idea. But if it's something that's totally different, it might be a little bit more. But I don't think there's any other way around this than a wide estimation or just getting full on access to this thing so you can poke around. And certainly I would not want to quote something without giving without having a poke around at it, because you don't know the awful crimes that have been committed by the previous developer before you.
Yeah. And even if, I think even like at the very least, you know what the system is and like where it's hosted. Okay, this is a WordPress site being hosted on Bluehost. Yeah, I know that there may be dragons in this code base. Maybe even you could give them a bit of a quote or a range of a quote with the preface of, just so you know, this is a scenario if this was how things are typically. You could think of it as like this. Like, have you got like a remodel being done or something like that? And then let's say you're just simply like doing some tile or something. They pull off the tile and they find a bunch of mold. Well, that project is going to balloon in cost comparably to just replacing the tile.
Yeah.
I've never had this been done to my house before, but I'd assume that's the case. That makes sense. At least I've seen it on home flipping shows, right? So I think you could take that approach and say, this is what it should cost. But again, try to get as much information as possible, because knowledge is power in this situation, and you want to make sure that quote is good, because if you quote too little, project takes up too much of your time, you're either going to eat that cost or you're going to make the client angry or something like that. And trust me, I've had situations where, especially early on in my career, where I felt like, oh, I'll just say yes to all this stuff because I'm trying to get in, I'm trying to get some experience, I'm trying to get some clients. And like only a handful of times did that work out well for me where I just like pushed through something that I knew was not a good idea necessarily just based on the way the client is acting or what it is. And then, that stuff only ever gets worse over time. Or the further you get into it, right? You say yes to a client, you think that client is like, maybe, well, they might be a little bit hard to work with, but I'll just knock it out and do whatever. And then you never know. So yes, get as much information as possible. And any quote that you do give them without seeing the code, make sure that they know that it could potentially rise in cost. Next question from Christian. Hi there. I really enjoy syntax while driving. On the last potluck session, you talked about cookies. I have 2 comments. First, HTTP cookies are readable by extensions, which it was surprising to me too. Feel free to look it up on my LinkedIn. Secondly, I would love to hear your take on partition cookies, aka chips. One more unrelated things, can you share tips on how to get more inspiration, talk ideas, post ideas? Love the vibe of the show. So I'm going to start first with the cookie business. And you are totally correct, Christian. HTTP cookies cannot be read by the client. JavaScript can be read by extensions, which apparently extensions have that layer of permissions that the client doesn't have that allow them to reach HTTP extensions. I did confirm this, and that is in fact correct. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christian, for that.
I wonder what the use case for that is. That seems...
Auth, maybe? I don't know. No, I had no idea. Yeah, auth inside of cookies or auth inside of extensions because extensions can't run on the server, so...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you want to be able to
Yeah.
set an HTTP only cookie from an extension, but then you need to be able to read it.
Yeah, what if you wanted to read it? Yeah. Also, he mentioned chips or partitioned cookies. Man, Christian brought the heat because this is also something I had not heard of. Partitioned cookies, which are not available in every browser. So I want to throw that caveat out there because partition cookies were something that had been in Chrome for a bit, were only added to Firefox in September. What month are we in? November? So 2 months ago? So they were just recently added to Firefox and are not in Safari at all. But what these things are is basically they're partitioned cookies so that, let me give you a use case here. Let's say you have like an iframed comments widget. Think something like discuss, right? Users could stay logged into the comments widget in each individual blog that they have signed in on. But the comments widget itself can't track users across those blogs. So each blog gets a separate independent user state. Blog owners get comment functionality without compromising user privacy. So basically, you would have one cookie. It would be for both comments widgets on one page, like you'd stay logged in to discuss on both pages within that iframe, but they couldn't track you between those sessions, which is not something, I've had to do very much. In fact, I don't really even know that much about cookie behavior in iframes.
Oh, I see.
But historically, when a site embeds content via an iframe, the embedded content has been able to set a cookie on the user's device in response to a cross-site request. If the user visits other sites that embed the same content, the embedded content can access the same cookie originally set by the first instance of the embedded content. What a sentence, man. Yeah.
So this is really nice because it can be used to track you across the web. So previously, this was done with images where you would, let's say you have an image to adserver.com and you embed the image to adserver.com, and adserver.com can set a cookie, and it also knows who is requesting it. So it knows, Scott.com has been requesting this, so we'll set a cookie for that. And then all of a sudden you go to Wes.com, and I also am embedding that image. Now it knows that you visited Wes and Scott.com. Now that's not possible anymore. We've removed that. You can't just do it via an image tag because it was being used for nefarious things. But there are some use cases where you do want to be able to have access to those cookies. So this will allow you to set cookies for a third party, but if it's then embedded on another page, like Scott says, you cannot. access it. I could see this being really handy for like Shopify websites that run on like subdomains. If you want to be able to run custom code on that page, third-party embedding widgets. This is surprising that Safari has not implemented this yet, because they are almost always the first to implement these pain in the butt cookie things, because Safari is number one with like not tracking you across their devices, even though Apple themselves has their own whole ad platform for iOS, but on the web they want to stop it. I'm surprised that Google and everyone has implemented it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for
that's
sure.
Cool. I had no idea.
I had never heard of this either. So yeah, you learn something new every day.
All right, next question from TJ. Let's set the record straight on the redirect codes: 301, 302, 303, and 307. So let's go through what those are real quick before we read the rest of the question. So 301 and 302 are probably the two that you're most familiar with, where 301 is a permanent redirect, and 302 is a temporary redirect. And when you would want to use one over the other is if you want it to be permanent or not. So for example, if you go to syntax.fm/856, we do a 301 redirect. And what that does is it looks up the episode for 856, and then we'll do a 301 redirect to the actual page. The reason we don't do a permanent redirect is because there is a possibility that we will change the title or the URL of that. And if that's the case, we have no way to clear that redirect in the user's browser unless the user were to explicitly take some action to open up DevTools and refresh the page, or go into their caches and delete it. And it's quite honestly, a permanent redirect is very scary to me.
Yeah. Yes.
There can be some SEO benefits to it, I think, but I almost always reach for the temporary redirect. And then we also have 303, which is see other, typically used to redirect after a post request, instructing the client to make a GET request to the new URL. So that's kind of interesting. So if you were to post some data, but you want to redirect it to a GET URL, for example, if you were posting a search term, you may want to redirect your user to a page where the search term is in the URL with a GET. And then a 307 is a temporary redirect, similar to 302, but strictly requires that the HTTP method, get, post, put, etc., remain the same during a redirection. All right, so those are the three here. Early 2000s train of thought was returning redirects was a very serious matter, that it could negatively impact Google rankings if done correctly. So I think has been a little timid about setting up redirects. That's exactly what I just said.
Same. Yeah.
I'm still unsure if I should be using the correct one. I read that 301 and 302 are considered old, not as good, and possibly bad practice. Rather, we should be using 303 and 307. If that is true, can you explain the difference between the new redirect codes? Speaking of HTTP response codes, my son was born on April 18th, and I love it. Congratulations. Yeah, this is a great question. I have also been using 301 and 302 myself as well, but I think it does make sense to explicitly enforce whether you are going to be changing the method of the request, meaning that you are going from a post to a GET, or if you're going from a post to a post. So I don't see why you wouldn't want to use these things. Again, I probably don't use permanent until you're absolutely sure that you are doing a permanent redirect, because that can get you into some hot water. I don't know what the SEO implications are for this type of thing, but I've just been using temporary redirects for all of my stuff, and I feel like I have pretty good SEO on all of my projects.
Yeah, my understanding is that those redirects, the permanent redirects, has always been taught to me as, you better be sure. You better be sure that this is a permanent change, because that kind of tells the search engines that, yes, this is always going to exist in this way. And if you don't know that, then don't do a permanent redirect. I think that could be useful where something like a brand's name has changed, or something that has irreparably, happened. There's no going back. So now that this redirect is happening, whereas let's say you just change a route from what it used to, you don't know that route structure is going to stay the same, or that you might not want to use that previous route at some point, anything like that. So I would always, like you said, lean on being cautious with permanent redirects, but maybe we should both dive in a little bit more deep to what is that actual implication, because I've been told that, but I don't think I have ever really deeply researched it.
I think there's probably also a security implication here where if you have a get URL that redirects to a post, there could be a use case where somebody clicks a link and that turns into a post request. And a post request could be changing some data or whatnot. And like you'd have to actually make that security hole in your own code. But being explicit about whether or not the method is changing on this request is probably some good foresight to have. Because there are also use cases for changing the method as well. Because, for example, a sign-in page, you post your username and password to a URL, and then you do a redirect to your account dashboard, which is a GET request, right?
Redirects. Oh, by the way, for people who didn't get the April 18th thing, the 418 response is "I'm a teapot," which is the funniest
I didn't
response.
get that at all.
Oh yeah, that's it's great. So thanks for that, TJ. By the way, I wanted to follow up Christian. By the way, the previous question asker had a second follow up, and since he had given us two nice little corrections, I figured we definitely had to answer his actual question, which was, one more unrelated thing. Can you share tips on how to get more inspiration for talks, posts, ideas? Love the show and the vibe. Christian, whatever you are into, man, dive into it, go deep. And, I think this partition cookies thing is a good example of this. I've never heard this. It would be interesting if a blog post came on my timeline that said, hey, have you heard of these partition cookies? They're new. Here's what they're used for. Here's what they're about. Maybe some visuals, maybe this or that. Might even make a good little talk here, or if you can find like some interesting use cases that make practical, or even just cookies in general. That's a talk right there. Cookies, deep dive.
I think that would be a fantastic talk, because there's quite a bit there, and they've changed. And what happens if you are signing in on a different URL, like that's a huge thing as well. You redirect somebody to a sign-in URL that lives on like auth0.com, and then you come back to your website, and how are those cookies shared? And then there's also this weird thing that I stumbled upon with cookies once, where if you host on .vercel.dev or github.io or any of these, like if you use a platform as a service and you host multiple, for example, at the time, I think I ran like app1.vercel.com and then app2.vercel.com. And I was setting the cookie on the main domain in my application, which was like vercel.com or whatever the Vercel hosting one is, or github.io. But I couldn't access the cookie from the other application. I was banging my head against the wall being like, why doesn't this work? Cookies are shareable between subdomains. And the reason why is that the browsers maintain lists of domains that are interpreted as top-level domain names, meaning that like .github.io is treated as if it were .io. Yes. And because multiple people will be hosting applications on the same domain name, that's not a good idea to be able to do it. So the browser has a whole list of .codepen and all of these services where you can host code.
Yeah, one thing about that, even that Apex domain thing, that's called an Apex domain when you don't have a subdomain on it. Do you know www, people who might not know this, is considered a subdomain, right?
Yes.
And that's a good reason to use www if you have a cookie that you need to be across the domain. I ran into issues with that personally, where I was setting a cookie from a subdomain to an Apex domain, and it was causing some problems. It was a little while ago, so I might be a little foggy on that. But yeah. One last thing before we get off this question. Christian, I think the best way to come up with stuff is to find something you are slightly interested in and maybe not an expert in or anything like that, and use it as an opportunity to dive deep into a subject, right? I think that always works, because if you got to
better
talk
way to
about
learn something than just to talk about it. If you're explaining it to somebody, you're going to learn a lot about it.
Yep, totally. And get your hands dirty, all that stuff, and then, yeah.
All right, next question from Mike. What are your thoughts on using a delay of about 1 second when turning off a loading state? For example, when you go to fetch some data, displaying a loading state of some kind while it's fetching, and then display the data while it returns. The problem is sometimes the data returns so quickly that toggling between a loading state and displaying the data seems clunky and conflicted. And I don't want to make my users wait longer to see the data, but I also want to keep the UI feeling nice. Absolutely. This is a really good thing, is if your users are on a fast connection, sometimes the loading state is just like a little blip, and it's just a split second, and it just looks odd. The answer to that is don't add more time to waiting the user. So to answer your question, don't do this. Adding time to showing up the UI, the answer to this is simply don't show a loader until you hit a specific amount. React Suspense used to actually have a delay prop that is sent. So React Suspense, what that does is you wrap your component in a suspense tag, and then you can provide the suspense tag a fallback, which is your loading screen, right? And it will show your fallback while it's waiting. And there used to be the ability to supply a delay to that, meaning that don't show anything unless you put a 400 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds on it, because if you're just showing a loader for 36 milliseconds, that doesn't make very much sense. I think they took that out. You have to implement it yourself in your fallback now. I don't know. I think that's true. Sometimes the best feeling UI is showing the user absolutely nothing at all.
Yeah, that's totally correct. I think loading spinners or loading states in general are a problem. It's not something you want to introduce if you don't have to. So yes, by all means, the way I handle this is very much what Wes said. If the loading time has taken more than 300 milliseconds or something, then I might show a loading spinner. Other than that, definitely do not introduce time into that loading, because you want to keep, that 1 second definitely matters. You want to keep, people on your site happy. All right, next question from CJ. So not CJ Reynolds probably, but CJ nonetheless. Apologies ahead of time if something similar has been asked before. I just discovered you folks. All right, not CJ Reynolds. Welcome, CJ. This is a question that could do with much more context, but I'll keep it short. What are your folks' thoughts on the current way interviews are done? And if available, how would you factor in past work or side projects in the decision-making process? I wanted to ask this as I had a technical interview where I admittedly, I can't say that word, Wes. Admittedly. That's my specificity. Admittedly, did pretty bad, though I would argue it wasn't entirely my fault. That said, I've worked a while now and have plenty of public code, both related to and not related to web dev, and could be reviewed. Unfortunately, that did not seem to matter in this case. Another time I couldn't move forward, even though I technically completed the assessment perfectly and everything worked according to the instructions, because I failed to give one unit test to pass that took me out of the running. Ooh, that's a rough one. Sorry for the weighty question. I'd still like to be programming, whether it's on the web or not, but I think at this point, I'm just tired and ready to consider looking at other professions. So, yes, I think there are a lot of things that go involved in an interview. And one thing that you can't overlook is that you might not be right for the company, or the company might not be right as well, because companies have interesting interview process. And I've been in interviews where halfway through the interview, I'm like, if I get a job offer presented to me, I'm not going to accept it, because this interview has revealed enough to me that I don't feel like this organization has it together. Now, granted, that was back when hiring was crazy, right? And you could get a job just by looking. You could Google web development, and a recruiter would come to your inbox. But that said, I do think this prior work is important. I think that's a big factor. It's a big factor of getting to talk with somebody, getting somebody in the door. If I get a resume, they have a really impressive GitHub, I look at their code looks great, that gets you in the door, but it doesn't get you the job. Because what gets somebody the job is how well they mesh with the team, mesh with the vibe. Yeah, sure. Technical proficiency, absolutely. You pass all that stuff, that's one step down. Code inside projects always looks super good. But that interview is so important from a personality perspective, more so than a lot of things. And people don't like to think this because we're developers, right? It should just be my code, that's the end of the line, right? My code is pristine. My code rules. You should want my code. But they're not hiring your code. They're hiring you as a programmer. And that is a big part of it. So not to say that your interview was bad because of something you did. I wasn't there. But just know that it is a factor of getting you in the door, and it's a factor of putting you higher on the list. But having these things will not seal the deal no matter what.
Yeah. He says the reason he didn't get the job was a failed test.
That's the second one.
Didn't pass. I don't think that was
correct. Yeah.
that may be what they told you, because it's also hard to tell people, hey, any feedback? Why didn't it work out? But a lot of it is, I'm guarantee you, if somebody really jived with you and you also had that mistake, I'm sure they're like, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. It's so much based on personality and how you get along. And not to say that it's your personality, it's the how the personalities work together, and it sucks to not get the job, but also you maybe dodged a bullet of something that wouldn't have been enjoyable for you to work in.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you want to know what kind of feedback I got from Google? I don't know what kind of feedback you got from Google, but after 3 separate interviews, one of which was 8 hours long, and a trip to San Francisco, I got a 1-sentence email that was, "You did not get the job." So, not everybody is going to tell you exactly what you did wrong. Yeah.
When I interviewed at Google, I think their feedback was something around like the technical, just I didn't have the chops very early into my career, and I don't think they saw that I was a good enough coder or software engineer.
They wanted me to whiteboard out HTTP requests without any sort of like libraries pre-fetch, before fetch existed. And I was just like, the syntax is, because I'm always either using a library or I'm using a framework that bakes it in. So I was just like, what did I? And I don't know if that's why I didn't get the job, but it was an all-day interview. And I had 5 or 6 technical interviews. I had to give a presentation with a PowerPoint to 3 Googlers. A lot of work. A lot of work. And then you have they take you out for lunch, which is in itself like an interview, even though they don't tell you it's an interview.
They see what you do with someone spills something, and they see what you do. And
psychological experiment. Yeah. What was it for me? That was late to one of my interviews because the first interviewer held me up. I wonder if that was this. I was supposed to be checking the clock for him. Who knows? Yeah.
I have a story about that type of thing. Is we were at the party for React Miami. They had these little globes of drinks that were glowing, and they had cherries in them. And I was like, I'm going to take one of these globes home for one of my kids. So I took mine, and I was like, I'm just going to take the ice out and clean it up. And then I was shaking it to get the ice out and didn't realize there was cherries in there. So all these cherries fell into the sink in the bathroom. And I was like, oh crap. And then there was a bunch of people around. So I just got my hands, I scooped up the cherries, and I went over to the garbage and put them in there. And some guy comes over, half in the bag. He's like, dude, you're so cool with me now because you did that. Most people would have just left it for the cleaner.
Really?
It says a lot about your personality. And I was like, yeah, that's the kind of stuff that what do you do in those situations? It's obviously embarrassing for me that I spilled cherries in the bathroom of this bar.
That's so embarrassing.
But it just,
I don't understand the type of person who wouldn't pick that up.
There's a lot of people that do that type of stuff. It's the same people that don't pick up after the dog when they're walking.
I empathize with anybody who's doing that type of work because that's not a lot of fun. I had to cleaned the bathrooms at a ski hill for several years, and that sucked. I tend to keep bathrooms very clean if I'm making a mess with cherries, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Let's move into sick picks and shameless plugs. I've got a sick pick for you today. I'm going to pick just getting dim, warm bulbs for your house. So we have all these little kids' night lights, and kids have lamps in their rooms and whatever. And like a regular 60-watt equivalent, whatever the LED equivalent is, it's too bright. It's absolutely brutal, and I feel like it keeps our kids up longer. So I went and found what is the dimmest possible bulb I can buy. I found some that are 10-watt equivalent. We got to switch to using lumens for bulbs, because we still we haven't had 60-watt bulbs in Canada for 10 years, and I still think a 60-watt bulb, but they're LED, but they have a really nice warm glow to them, 2200 Kelvin, and it just makes them feel a lot better. I'm big on lighting color as well as lighting amount, and if you can't dim a light, then yeah, maybe go grab one of these bulbs.
Nice. Yeah, I wish that I could get Courtney to appreciate a dark, warm bulb in the house. She got to have all the lights on full blast, and I'm just but it's we got to have a cave atmosphere.
I like them on full blast when I'm working. I come every morning. I come into the kitchen. My wife has a candle on, and it's dark. I'm
okay.
Turn them on. I need to see what I'm doing. But when the kids are sleeping, it needs to be a lot less bright.
I'm talking about 9 o'clock. I'm 9 o'clock.
Oh yeah.
We better be totally cave atmosphere, and I can't get that. I can't get that in the household. So wish I could. I do my very best to have Home Assistant dim them all, but I think it just becomes more of an annoyance, a general annoyance to everyone involved.
Yeah. I often try to dim or brighten 1% at a time, but you can still tell when it we need dimmers that will do it over 6 minutes.
Ooh, yes. I do have a Home Assistant thing that does that for waking up. It slowly sunsets them, but it is kind of a pain, that I feel that should be a default functionality just baked in, instead of there's some automation action you have to run, and it's kind of not super reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be sweet.
All right. I'm going to sick pick stainless steel cookware. I've always been a nonstick guy. I've bought lots of nonstick cookware, and by lots because, man, that stuff just doesn't last. I don't think I realized, when you're buying nonstick, it's set up to fail in X amount of years, no matter what.
Yeah, that drives me crazy.
Yeah, no matter what you do with nonstick cookware, you baby it like crazy. You never use metal utensils, and you take good care of it. No matter what, that coating always comes off. So I moved. We were due for it. It has been a long time since we upgraded it or even modified our cookware. The surface was coming off of just about everything, so we went straight up stainless for everything, and it has taken a bit to get used to. But the best part about stainless is that even if stuff gets baked on, it's relatively easy to clean off. I found you need to cook, especially, I don't know if it's all stainless or just the ones that we got, but you need less heat than I needed before with my previous pans. I don't know if that has something to do with how thick the stainless is or anything like that.
The carbon steel that I use is the same way, where if you crank it because you want it hot fast, and then before you know it, it's way too hot. You got to give it a sec to sort of warm up first and do the whole thing where you the water has to dance on it. And there's a good TikTok, steelpan.guy. He's hilarious. He starts all his TikToks off with this is what Big Chicken doesn't want you to know, and he shows how to cook in a steel pan. I've not done the stainless pan just yet. I've been carbon steel, but every now and then I'm tempted to try it. I don't need any more pans.
Oh yeah, we specifically needed pans, so that was the whole thing. But yeah, stainless steel pans. I did not even know that was I got to be real honest. I thought everything was, I mean, either you got a cast iron or you got a nonstick. I was so ignorant to the wild world of different pan options. So stainless steel.
There's also aluminum, which is aluminum's big in like commercial kitchens. You know, restaurants are big with that, but I think your steel pan is ideal.
Yeah, I wanted to get something that would last forever, not have to worry about some sort of coating on it.
All right. Shameless plugs. Check out our YouTube, youtube.com/ what is it? Syntax FM?
Yes.
Is it? No,
it
it's not.
At youtube.com/
Syntax FM.
Yeah. What did you say?
Oh, yeah. I just said / Syntax FM. You got to put the @ in there. But hit the subscribe button. You can watch us. You can watch CJ's videos. So it's not just podcasts. We got all kinds of good stuff on there. Check it on out.
Yes. Smash that subscribe. But also leave a comment below if you have any differing thoughts or opinions on any of the questions we asked. Or if you want to ask a question yourself, head on over to syntax.fm. Click that Ask a Potluck Question button and submit your potluck question. We love to hear from you. We love your questions. And keep them coming.
Peace.
Peace.